We talked about that last week. Number 2, to protect her reputation, Mary told relatives and friends about the angel's message. True or false? The answer is false. It says she told no one. She told no one and went off to the hill country of Judah. Number 3, the shepherds were guided to the manger by a star. True or false? The answer is false. The shepherds were led by the angels. The wise men were led by the star. Number 4, the wise men came first to Bethlehem to see Jesus. True or false? False. James, you're saying it's false. Why is it false?
You say the wise men came first?
Well, they came first to Bethlehem to see Jesus.
Oh, they came first to see him.
Now, I'm saying that the first place they came was Bethlehem. No? Went to Jerusalem for a vote. Very good. So they say, oh, this is never part of the quiz. So, the shepherds found Jesus wrapped in swaddling clothes. True or false? True. It's true. Number 6, Joseph, warned in a dream, fled to Nazareth. True or false? False. He fled to Egypt.
You're right.
All right, here's our bonus question. This is the key question for the day. Which of the, and some of you actually have heard this question before. Which of the following is not part of the Christmas story? It might seem simple, but shepherds worshiping, angels singing, wise men traveling from afar, or Zerubbabel, the governor of Judah?
Angels singing.
Angels singing. You say, no, it's Zerubbabel, governor of Judah. That has nothing to do with the Christmas story. That's what we're going to talk about today. So, we're going to talk about Zerubbabel. I preached about Zerubbabel once 5 years ago, but it's such a good story, I want to bring it up again today. If you're with me in Matthew chapter 1, we have here the genealogy of Jesus Christ. You know, when we think about Christmas, what are the first things we think about? Well, for some people, it's Santa and Frosty and Rudolph. We think, no, that's not Christmas. But we often think, the manger scene, the nativity, the shepherds, the angels. And probably the last thing on our mind in the Christmas story is genealogy. But that shows us our American culture, our Western culture. Because for a Jew, genealogy is everything. Who you are is where you came from. And throughout the Old Testament, there are many cases where genealogy was key. Certain priests who came back and they were not allowed to minister if they didn't have their genealogical records. And they said, we need to find somebody with the high priest with the urim and the thummim to seek God's advice whether or not we can take these people because they don't have their genealogy. For the Jews, genealogy was a key part. And so the Gospel of Matthew is a gospel written for the Jews to show that their Messiah had come. And Matthew traces the line back through his ancestors to show that Jesus has the legal right to rule as the king of Israel. Over in England, there's something called the peerage. It's a record of the royal family, of who are the peers of the king or the queen. And so, of course, the monarch is Queen Elizabeth II. And when she dies, we know who's going to take over. But let's say there was a major accident and multiple family members of the royal family were killed. Who gets to rule? Well, that's where they pull out the peerage. They pull out the genealogical chart of who is ranked where in line of succession for the throne. A number of years ago, there was some movie out, it was called King Ralph, about the whole family got together for a photo and they were all electrocuted. And so they had to go back through the genealogies and they found some bum in America to come over and be the king. Matthew starts out here in his book showing the fact that Jesus is a descendant of King David. And therefore he has the legal right to be the lawful king. In the genealogy, there are several interesting names given. Here in Matthew, we find 4 women listed in the genealogy in addition to Mary. We've preached about those women before Christmas has passed. There's also a genealogy listed in Luke chapter 3. But the genealogy in Luke differs from the genealogy in Matthew. Some people look at that and say, see, the Bible is filled with error. It's filled with mistakes. There's 2 different family lines. It can't possibly be true. You can't be born to different parents. But here again, that's because we come with our American mindset, not understanding genealogies. Because the Jews had different types of genealogies. One genealogy showed the legal rights, the legal right to rule. And that's what we find here in Matthew. The other genealogy was a genealogy of physical descent. And that's what we find in Luke. Because we find that, you remember in Matthew we find Joseph's genealogy. And Jesus is the legal son of Joseph. He's not the physical son of Joseph. We find his physical descent in Luke through Mary. But the interesting thing is, as we look at Matthew's account and as we look at Luke's account, we find they intersect in this man, Zerubbabel. When we look at these genealogies, you say, well, that's a big deal. Why is it significant? Because the more confident we are that God has not made mistakes and his word is accurate, that the more confident we are of God's brilliant orchestration of plans. We see what a genius of a God we have. A God that we can trust. God is not surprised. Things don't take him by accident. God is fully prepared. He is on top of everything. He knows what he is doing. So here in Matthew's genealogy, down in verse 12, it traces the line through a king. It says, after the exile of Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel. Shealtiel, the father of Zerubbabel. So here is a man named Jeconiah. In Jeremiah 22:30, it talks about this Jeconiah. It says, this is what the Lord says. Record this man as if childless, a man who will not prosper in his lifetime. For none of his offspring will prosper, none will sit on the throne of David or rule any more in Judah. So God prophesies that the line of this king would end. And following Jeconiah, the kingdom in Israel ends. But God has also made a promise to David back in 2 Samuel 7. Your house and your kingdom shall endure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. So if the line of Jeconiah ends, how does David's line continue? The answer is through the virgin-born Messiah. Because what we find in Matthew, through the legal right of inheritance, Jesus has the legal right to rule as the king. But he's not the physical, flesh and blood descendant of Jeconiah. And so therefore, God's prophecy is true to both David, that his throne continues, and to Jeconiah, that his line will end. God miraculously takes insurmountable obstacles and overcomes them by his miraculous power. But we often miss this because we don't like genealogies. We don't like a lot of names. We just want to skip over and get to the good stories. Get to the miracles, multiplying loaves and fishes and feeding 5,000. And we often bypass so much good truth and good teaching that we find in genealogies. So as I said, in both Matthew and Luke, we find this man, Zerubbabel. And to understand who Zerubbabel is, take your Bible and turn left 3 books to the book of Haggai. It's a small book, you might pass it, so turn back carefully. Haggai only has 2 chapters, and we're going to look at the book of Haggai and find out about Zerubbabel. So allow me to set the stage. About 2500 BC, Abraham. God says, Abraham, I'm going to make you a great nation. And Abraham has Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, remember the story of Joseph? He goes down to Egypt. He's in slavery in Egypt. Finally, there's famine. And he sends word to his brothers, bring my father, bring the whole family down here. They're in Egypt 400 years. End up becoming slaves in Egypt. They cry out. God sends the deliverer Moses. God brings them up to the promised land. And they come to the promised land. They wander 40 years. They come to the promised land. They go in. They settle the land. Joshua judges Ruth. And then they want to be like the nations around them. They want a king. God gives them King Saul. Saul rejects God, disobeys God, and says, I'm going to set a king after my own heart. And appoints David to be king. David and his son Solomon, the glory days of Israel. They have peace on every side. People come and pay them tribute. Solomon's son Rehoboam, foolish king. And under his leadership, the nation is split in a northern half and a southern half. Northern half, called Israel, has all wicked kings. 722 BC, the Assyrians come down and wipe them out. The southern country, called Judah, has a mix of good and bad kings. And during the time of the Assyrian invasion, they cry out to God, and God delivers them. What we read about in the verses, 186,000 people killed in one night by one angel from God. Years later, because of their idolatry, because of the rejection of God, the Babylonians come down and take them off into slavery. They're there in slavery 40 to 70 years in captivity. Finally, they return to the land. The story of Ezra and Nehemiah, the story of Esther. They return to the land. They start rebuilding the temple. But the people get comfortable and the work stops. And so we find that Satan has stopped the rebuilding of Jerusalem through controversy. Satan loves to stir up controversy to get us sidetracked from what is really important. Ezra 4:24 states, thus the work on the house of God in Jerusalem came to a standstill until the second year of the king of Darius, king of Persia. So 16 years after they come back, the temple still hasn't been built, the walls haven't been built, the city hasn't been rebuilt, because the people have just been building their own houses. They said, I don't have time to work in God's house, I have to work on my own house. So Haggai chapter 1 talks about the apathy of the people. Quick run through. They start giving excuses. Verse 2 says, these people say the time has not come for the Lord's house to be built. The Jews knew exactly what God had sent them back to do. Go back and rebuild. They said, we've got plenty of time. We don't have to get around to that. They were giving excuses for not doing what they should be doing. They had wrong priorities. Verse 3. Then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses while this house remains a ruin? The people were supposed to be rebuilding God's house, but they were ignoring that, taking all their energies and putting them into building their own houses. Actually, if you look, God had provided in the Old Testament all the paneling that they needed to rebuild. But when it came time to rebuild, the paneling wasn't there. Where'd it go? Well, they were paneling their own houses with God's paneling. Haggai says, you're living in your paneled houses. And God's house is a ruin. They have wrong priorities. You ever hear somebody say, I don't have time to go to church. And yet they sit then for 3 hours and watch NASCAR. No. Hey, what are your priorities? We do what we want to do. Haggai goes on to say they expected blessing. They wrongly expected blessing. Verse 9, you expected much, but see, it turned out to be little. What you brought home I blew away. Why declares the Lord Almighty? Because of my house, which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with his own house. Haggai said, they expected much. They said, God owes me big time. We've been in captivity for 70 years, so God owes us. After all, we're the Jews here. We're his chosen people. He ought to bless us. They thought that God owed them a blessing. Many times as Christians, we fall into the same mistake. We think God owes us a blessing. Well, we're Christians and God has to answer our prayers. I prayed for it. I don't know why you didn't give it to me. Because we think God works for us. There's an old expression that many people want to serve God, but only in an advisory capacity. We think, God, you get stuck. Tell me, and I'll tell you, I've got my plans already worked out. If you just do what I say, everything's going to go fine. These people wrongly expected God's blessing. Because the truth is, we don't pray for God's blessing. We live for God's blessing. We have to live an obedient life so that God can bless us. Because many times, what God needs to bring is judgment, punishment, reproof into our life because we're out of line. And so down in Haggai chapter 1, verse 14, we see that God uses Zerubbabel, the governor of Judah, and Joshua the priest to get the people obeying the Lord and restarting the work on the temple. We always start by making a commitment, but it's meaningless unless you do something to actually change. This time of year, especially New Year's, people have all these good intentions. You know, I'm going to start the new year different, and I'm going to eat better, I'm going to lose weight, I'm going to read my Bible, I'm going to pray. All these good intentions. People hear a sermon and say, Pastor is absolutely right, you need to change, I need to, and you fill in the blank. But it's meaningless unless we actually do something about it. So, Zerubbabel actually gets the people motivated to get back to work, to doing what they were called to do in the first place. Haggai goes on, chapter 2. We see God encourages them. When they step out and start working, God encourages them by verse 4, reminding them of his presence. For I am with you, declares the Lord Almighty. Verse 5, chapter 2, he reminds them of his promise. This is what I covenanted with you when you came out of Egypt. God had promised the people he would be with them. He still was with them. He reminds them of his protection, verse 5. And my spirit remains among you, do not fear. Even though there are enemies all around me, he says, you don't have anything to fear. Book of Nehemiah, we find when they rebuilt the wall, they had a trowel in one hand and their sword in the other hand. They were working while they were watching for the enemy. Nehemiah says, whenever you hear the trumpet, go to that section of the wall. If anybody started attacking, they'd blow the trumpet. Everybody run. They'd drop a trowel, get their sword that they already had, and come to fight. But even though there are enemies all around, God reminds them, you don't have to be afraid, I'll protect you. Verse 8, he reminds them of his provision. People who were struggling to get all the materials to rebuild this massive temple, God gives us a reminder. The silver is mine, the gold is mine, declares the Lord Almighty. Sometimes, as Christians, we get all worried about, well, how can we do this? How can I put my money in the offering plate? I need that money here. How am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to get by? We're reminded that God will provide. And whenever we seek to follow God, God will provide what we need. So God goes on in chapter 2 to give the people hope. Chapter 1, we see their apathy. They're not doing what they should do. Zerubbabel motivates them to take action, and then we see God giving them encouragement. He gives them hope. Verse 6, this is what the Lord Almighty says. In a little while I will once more shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry land. I will shake all nations, and the desired of all nations will come. God reminds the Jews that he is still in control. That circumstances have not changed his plan, that has not changed his power. He is working out his plan. His plan involves the temple. That's why he wants the temple rebuilt. So that one day to come, the promised Messiah, the one who is the desired of all nations, will come to that temple. We see that in the Christmas story. Mary and Joseph take Jesus, 8 days old, and bring him to the temple. And he meets Simeon and Anna to give the prophecies about his life and his death and his ministry. We find Jesus in the Palm Sunday story coming to the temple and all the crowds proclaiming him king. In the future, one day, Jesus will return to the temple and he'll set up his throne in Jerusalem. So God had a purpose. The purpose involved the temple, so the Jews needed to rebuild that temple. Down in chapter 2, verse 10. See, God teaches that obedience is the pathway to his blessings. God gives, through Haggai, 2 visual pictures to illustrate this. He uses examples from the Old Testament. But will holy things make unholy things clean? The answer is no. Will unholy things pollute pure things? The answer is yes. So, Haggai's examples we're not real familiar with, but put it in modern context. If I take a rotten banana and put it with a bunch of good bananas, if I take a good banana and put it with a bunch of rotten bananas, does that good banana make the rotten ones good? No, it doesn't. But if I take a rotten one and put it with good ones, it will make the good ones rotten. Example number 2. If someone has the flu and walks into a room, what's going to happen? Will people get sick? Yes. Those germs spread. We all understand that. Haggai's two illustrations, he's trying to help the people see that just by giving offerings, offering sacrifices, it doesn't make their sinful hearts right with God. But their sinful hearts make their sacrifices unimportant. God says, other places, I don't want your sacrifices, I want your obedience. To obey is better than the sacrifice. Some people think, well, I'll just put more money in the offering plate because I did some things I shouldn't this week, I'll just put more money in the offering plate. God doesn't want our money. He wants our obedience. So Haggai gives two people illustrations to help them understand the need to obey God. So now the people have turned to obey God. They're led by Zerubbabel and Joshua the priest. So down in verse 19, God tells them, from this day on, I will bless you. They face consequences of disobedience. But now that they've changed and said, okay, we're going to start serving God, God says, you know what? Now I'm going to start blessing you. You're obeying me, so now I can pour out my blessing on you. So the message in chapter 2 is a message of hope. We look down at verse 21. And this is a message for Zerubbabel. So who is Zerubbabel? We've seen he's in Jesus' genealogies, in both genealogies. He is a royal prince, but he's not ruling on a throne. Because when they come back, Persia is still ruling the land. Here's Zerubbabel. He is the rightful heir to the throne. He's just a provincial governor. We look at his ancestry, and we see in Jeremiah 22, Jeconiah, also called Jehoiachin, is given this prophecy. As surely as I live, declares the Lord, even if you, Jehoiachin, son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, were a signet ring at my right hand, I would still pull you off. Think of the king's ring that he signed all his documents with. It said, even if you were my signet ring, I'd pull you off. I'm done with you. It says, I will hand you over to those who seek your life, those you fear, to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and to the Babylonians. So, back to the genealogy in Matthew. Who is this Jehoiakim or this Jeconiah? It says he's the father of Shealtiel. Shealtiel, the father of Zerubbabel. The kingdom of the Jews has been taken away from Zerubbabel's grandfather. Actually, he's not, because he's in Matthew. If you look at the genealogy carefully, it's actually his uncle's grandfather, because this is a legal right in Matthew. The kingdom is taken away in the days of his grandfather. So here is Zerubbabel, king by right, serving as the governor of the land. You think he's probably very discouraged. He wishes he could rule. After all, he doesn't have the rank and privilege that his grandfather does. He comes back to his homeland, but he can't rule the homeland even though he is the rightful king. It'd be very easy to feel like, God, you forsook me. I should be sitting on a throne ruling the country, and where are you at, God? But God gives Zerubbabel a special message to encourage him. Verse 21, tell Zerubbabel, governor of Judah, that I will shake the heavens and the earth. God reminds him that he is still in control. No matter how the nations and the armies fight for power and survival, God is the one who holds it in his hand. In the earlier prophecy back in verse 6, he reminds that he is sending the Messiah. That Jesus will come and set up his eternal throne. Here in verse 22, we read, I will overturn royal thrones and shatter the power of the foreign kingdoms. I will overthrow chariots and their drivers, horses and their riders will fall, each by the sword of his brother. On that day, declares the Lord Almighty, I will take you, my servant, Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, declares the Lord, and I will make you like my signet ring, for I have chosen you, declares the Lord Almighty. God says to his grandfather, Jeconiah, you know what? Even if you're the ring of my finger that I seal all my documents with, I'm done with you. But he says to Zerubbabel, even though you might think you're nothing right now, you might think you wish you were on the throne, but you tell you what, you're special to me. You're just like if I put a ring on my finger. You're going to be my minion. You're going to be my source of power and authority. You're going to lead the people for me. And so, to Zerubbabel, we find God giving this prophecy. Zechariah 14, we find full description of the prophecy. Jesus comes back in the future, sets his feet on the Mount of Olives. He sets his kingdom on the earth that Jerusalem rules for 1,000 years. God reminds Zerubbabel that he will offer his blessing on Zerubbabel, for he will be like his signet ring once again. So Zerubbabel never becomes king. He never gets to rule as king of Israel. He only ever becomes a provincial governor. But it's through his line that the Messiah comes. In Matthew chapter 1, we find Zerubbabel is mentioned in the line of Joseph. In Luke chapter 3, we find him also in the line of Christ, this time through the lineage of Mary. The genealogies intersect in Zerubbabel. And they go out again their separate ways. And they come back and they intersect again in Jesus. It's very interesting that you have these two separate family lines, and they come together in this one man, Zerubbabel. He is the one descendant from David who follows through in both genealogies. Sometimes the greatest impact we make in our lives is the legacy we leave. Sometimes we think, what am I doing with my life? What has God done? I haven't done anything great. But many times, the greatness of what God does in our lives and through our lives isn't seen for years later. There was a shoe salesman once who wanted to have a class for boys, wanted to teach a Sunday school class, went to his church, and they said, we really don't have any room. Why don't you go out and gather some boys and teach them a lesson? And he went out and gathered some boys together, and one of the boys was a man named D.L. Moody. Everybody knows the name D.L. Moody. Basically helped change the world. And literally hundreds of thousands of people were converted by his ministry. But how did he come to Christ? Because one unknown shoe salesman had a heart to reach boys with the gospel. Many times we don't understand the legacy we will leave with our lives. I love the story of Sevilla flood. I've shared it with you before. David and Sevilla flood were missionaries over in the Belgian Congo. They went to a tribe. The chief said, no, nobody can see it. You can't witness, can't preach. They lived in a little hut out all alone. The only person they had contact with was a little village boy who came out and sold them eggs. So Sevilla witnessed to the little village boy. Sevilla died. David became bitter. Sevilla had a baby, named her Aggie. She died. David became bitter. He packed up, left the country, moved back to the States. He ended up giving the child to some other missionaries who ended up settling out back in Washington or Oregon, somewhere up northwest. Years later, this little girl Aggie grows up, and one day she's paging through a magazine, sees a white cross and the name Sevilla Flood, her mother's name. She finds somebody translated. It was in Sweden. It was a Swedish magazine, and so they translated it, and it's all about how Belgian Congo was affected by this woman, Sevilla Flood, her mother. A couple of years later, and if anybody wants a full story, I can give you the full story. Years later, she's at a conference, and here's a representative from Belgian Congo talking about hundreds of thousands of believers and churches started all across this country. She came up afterwards and said, have you ever heard of Sevilla Flood? He said, oh yes, she's the most famous woman in our history. He says, I was that little village boy. He said, your mother won me to Christ, and I went back to the village, and today hundreds of thousands of believers are following Christ because of Sevilla Flood. We so often don't understand, like Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story. Here we find Zerubbabel, a good man who follows God. He calls the people to obedience, and the people make a commitment they're going to obey God. And where they had been under God's punishment before, suddenly God says, I'm going to start blessing you. And he pours out his blessing on them. And the impact, they rebuilt the temple, which later on is used by God. And the Messiah comes, doubly through the line of this man, Zerubbabel. Say, it's not really a Christmas message, but it is. This Christmas season, let's look for God to work through us. We might not understand until years later the impact we've made. Maybe just by a witness to the paperman who delivers your newspaper. The clerk at the checkout counter, you go through, she sees down, and you say, all right, is everything okay? And suddenly she starts sharing about everything going on. You think, oh, I was praying for that. And you take a moment to pray with her. You might not realize until years later the impact you've made. But we want to be open for God to work. I'm sure Zerubbabel never pictured in his mind what God was going to do through him. He, in his life, never became the king. But God abundantly blessed and used him. And we were finding reflected in both genealogies in the Christmas story. The genealogy of Jesus is a reminder to us of God's faithfulness. God's faithfulness in blessing his obedient servants. And we want to faithfully obey God and look for him to use us this week. Let's pray together. God, you are such a wonderful God. You are so marvelous in how you work. And how you orchestrate even the details of our life that seem to be insignificant. As we talked last week about looking for, being prepared for unexpected opportunities that arise. Help us, Lord, to be faithful in obeying you, in taking time for the teachable moment, in taking the time to put aside our busy schedules to reach out to those who have a need. And may you use us for your glory. May never realize until heaven of how great of an impact we've made because of faithfully obeying you. But Lord, we look forward to how you will work because we pray in Jesus' name.